There is a lake in Cameroon that looks calm, green, and almost ordinary. But one night, without warning, it released an invisible cloud that moved through nearby villages and killed more than 1,700 people, while many of them were asleep. The place is called Lake Nyos. It sits in the highlands of northwestern Cameroon, inside a volcanic region where deep forces still shape the ground. From the surface, the lake does not look like a weapon. It is surrounded by steep slopes, farmland, small settlements, and quiet water. That is part of what makes the disaster so disturbing. The danger was not obvious. It was stored silently under the water. Lake Nyos is a crater lake. It formed in a volcanic landscape, and volcanic gases can rise from below the ground into the water. One of those gases is carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is not always dramatic. It has no color. At normal levels, people breathe it out every day. But in high concentration, it can push oxygen away and suffocate people before they understand what is happening.
For years, carbon dioxide entered the deep water of Lake Nyos. Because the lake is deep and layered, the gas did not immediately escape into the air. Instead, pressure at the bottom helped keep the carbon dioxide dissolved, almost like gas trapped inside a sealed bottle. The deeper the water, the more pressure it had. The more pressure it had, the more gas it could hold. That hidden storage is the key to the story. A lake can look peaceful at the surface, while the deepest water is slowly becoming dangerous. If the layers stay stable, the gas can remain trapped. But if something disturbs the lake, or if the lower water becomes overloaded, that trapped gas can begin to rise. As it rises, pressure drops. When pressure drops, more gas comes out of solution. That can create a chain reaction. Scientists call this kind of event a limnic eruption. It is rare, but when it happens, the lake releases a large amount of dissolved gas very quickly. The gas bursts upward, pushes water aside, and then spills out across the land. Because carbon dioxide is heavier than normal air, it does not simply vanish upward like smoke. It can flow downhill, stay close to the ground, and fill valleys like an invisible flood.
On the evening of August 21st, 1986, Lake Nyos released that flood. Survivors later described hearing a rumbling sound. Some people saw a strange mist or felt wind. Others remembered almost nothing. The gas cloud moved through the low areas around the lake and into nearby villages, including Nyos, Cha, and Subum. People and animals collapsed where the carbon dioxide displaced the air they needed to breathe. The disaster was especially deadly because it happened at night. Many people were sleeping. There was no fire to run from, no visible wave of flames, and no clear warning system. A person could wake up confused, weak, and unable to breathe. Others never woke up at all. Livestock died in large numbers as well, which helped reveal the scale of the invisible cloud. By morning, the scene was almost impossible to understand. Houses were still standing. There had been no earthquake that destroyed buildings, no lava flow that burned villages, and no war. But people were dead across the landscape. Families had been wiped out in their homes. Animals lay in fields and compounds. Survivors found themselves surrounded by silence.
At first, there was confusion about what had happened. Some people feared poison, spirits, explosions, or a strange disease. The lake itself looked changed. Reports described disturbed water and unusual coloring. But the real killer had already moved through and dispersed. Carbon dioxide released from deep below the lake's surface. The number most often given is more than 1,700 people killed, along with thousands of animals. The exact human impact was larger than a statistic can show. Entire households disappeared. Children lost parents. Villages lost neighbors, workers, elders, and relatives in a single night. It was not a disaster people could easily make sense of, because the killer had been invisible. Lake Nyos was not the first warning in Cameroon. 2 years earlier, in 1984, Lake Monoun released carbon dioxide and killed 37 people. That disaster was smaller, but it showed that volcanic crater lakes in the region could store dangerous gas. After Lake Nyos, scientists understood that the problem was not a myth or a one-time accident. It was a real natural hazard.
The science became clearer after investigation. Carbon dioxide from volcanic sources was entering the lake at depth.
The water column had become loaded with gas. At some point, the system tipped. The trigger is still discussed, with possibilities including a landslide, a disturbance in the water, cooling, or simply the gas concentration becoming unstable. But once the eruption began, the physics made it worse. Rising gas pulled more water upward, which released more gas, which pulled even more water upward. It is the same basic reason a shaken soda bottle can erupt when opened, but on a terrifying natural scale. The lake held dissolved gas under pressure. When the pressure balance failed, the gas came out violently. Unlike a soda bottle, the result was not foam on a table. It was a heavy cloud that moved through human settlements. The shape of the land made the disaster more dangerous. Valleys and low areas can guide heavier than air gas. Instead of spreading evenly in all directions, the carbon dioxide followed the terrain. People in lower places were especially vulnerable. This is why a lake that released gas in one location could kill people across surrounding villages.
What makes Lake Nyos frightening is that the water itself was not poisonous in the ordinary sense. The lake did not need to turn into acid or lava. The danger was the gas it had stored. The surface could be beautiful. The surroundings could be quiet. But below, the lake was holding a suffocating atmosphere under pressure. After the disaster, the question became how to stop it from happening again. Scientists and engineers developed a degassing system. The idea was to place pipes into the deep water and allow gas-rich water to rise in a controlled way. Once water starts rising through the pipe, carbon dioxide comes out, making the water less dense and helping drive a fountain at the surface. This lets the lake release gas gradually instead of explosively. The first major degassing pipe at Lake Nyos began operating years after the disaster, and additional pipes were later installed. These systems created controlled fountains and reduced the amount of dissolved carbon dioxide in the deep water. It was a rare example of engineering being used to manage a hidden natural threat without draining the entire lake.
But the danger was not only about gas. Lake Nyos is held back by a natural dam made of volcanic material. Scientists also worried that if that dam failed, water could rush downstream and create another disaster. That meant the lake required long-term monitoring, not just one repair. The place had become a symbol of how a quiet landscape can contain several layers of risk. The human memory of the event remains heavy. Survivors had to live with a disaster that many people outside the region had never heard of. The story is often described as mysterious because it sounds impossible. A lake killed villages overnight. But the real explanation is not less disturbing. It shows that nature can be deadly even when it is silent, invisible, and scientifically explainable. Lake Nyos also changed how scientists look at other crater lakes. Around the world, lakes in volcanic regions can trap gases under certain conditions. Most will never erupt like Nyos, but the disaster proved that rare hazards can become catastrophic when people live close to them. Monitoring gas levels, lake stability, and nearby settlements became more important after 1986.
The tragedy also reminds us that not all disasters announce themselves with fire, shaking ground, or storm clouds. Some dangers accumulate slowly. Carbon dioxide entered the lake over time, layer by layer, year by year, until the system could no longer hold it safely. The disaster was sudden for the people, but the conditions had been building quietly beneath the surface. Today, Lake Nyos still exists, and it is far safer than it was before the degassing systems. But its history remains one of the darkest examples of a natural disaster caused by an invisible gas. The lake did not chase anyone. It did not burn or explode in the way people expect. It simply released what had been trapped inside it. There is another unsettling part of the story. The disaster did not happen because local people ignored an obvious danger. Most people had no way to know that the lake could store gas in that way. The water was part of the landscape, part of daily life, and part of the environment around the villages. That makes Lake Nyos different from many disasters where the warning signs are visible. Here, the warning was hidden in chemistry, pressure, depth, and volcanic geology.
The aftermath also showed how difficult invisible disasters are to explain. When a flood destroys a bridge, people can point to the water. When a volcano covers land with ash, people can point to the eruption. At Lake Nyos, many homes remained in place, and the lake could return to looking quiet. That visual contradiction made the tragedy harder to process. The evidence was in the bodies, the dead livestock, the survivor accounts, and the scientific measurements taken afterward. For the families who survived, the story did not end when the gas dispersed. Villages had to bury the dead, care for children who had lost parents, and decide whether the land around the lake could ever feel safe again. Some survivors described waking among people who were already gone. Others had to walk through settlements where nearly every normal sound had disappeared. The disaster was not only a scientific event, it was a human rupture that changed entire communities in one night.
That is why the engineering response mattered so much. The pipes were not just machines placed in a lake. They were an attempt to turn a hidden, sudden danger into a controlled, visible process. A fountain of gas-rich water may look strange, but it is far safer than allowing pressure to build silently again. In that sense, Lake Nyos became both a warning and a lesson. If a natural system can store danger quietly, monitoring must be just as patient as the danger itself. That is why Lake Nyos is so haunting. The most dangerous thing in the story was not a monster, a weapon, or a visible wave. It was a calm lake holding a hidden atmosphere at the bottom. And when that atmosphere escaped, it turned the night air itself into something people could not survive.